Most people don't fall in love with a person. They fall into a psychological pattern. What they call love is often an emotional reaction built on unmet needs, internal wounds, and unconscious expectations. The person they're drawn to becomes a screen. Onto it, they project everything they never got, everything they fear, and everything they think will complete them. Carl Jung called this projection, and in romantic love, it's almost never recognized. That's why love turns into obsession. That's why it quickly becomes unstable, because it was never love to begin with. It was compensation. It was fantasy. It was shadow. The shadow isn't some dark, mysterious concept. It's simply the part of your psyche you refuse to acknowledge. The part you hide, suppress, or reject. The part you don't want to be or don't know how to deal with. And when it comes to romantic relationships, the shadow plays the loudest role. Most people don't enter love from wholeness. They enter from absence. They're not sharing their truth. They're chasing something. Approval, security, power, validation, and they disguise it as love. That's where the problem begins. You think you've found someone special, but what you've really found is someone who activates your shadow. They seem perfect at first. They fit everything your unconscious has been looking for. Maybe they remind you of someone. Maybe they give you a feeling you can't explain. Maybe you feel like you've known them forever. That's not a spiritual connection. That's a pattern repeating. That's the shadow trying to resolve itself through another person. When this happens, you lose clarity. You stop seeing who they are and start seeing what they mean to you. You attach to the feeling they give you. You become addicted to the version of yourself that exists around them. It feels powerful, intoxicating, overwhelming. But it's not real. It's an internal process projected outward. You're not relating to them. You're relating to your story. And that story was written long before they ever showed up. Jung warned that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will rule your life, and you'll call it fate. In romantic love, this looks like falling for the same type of person again and again, being hurt in the same way, ending relationships in the same confusion, calling emotional chaos passion, calling attachment devotion, calling self-abandonment unconditional love. It's all shadow. And as long as you don't face it, it will keep controlling you. The shadow doesn't want connection. It wants control. It wants safety. It wants to protect you from old pain. So it turns your partner into a tool, a shield, a solution. That's why you panic when they pull away. That's why you obsess over their attention. That's why you read into every silence, every text, every look. You're not reacting to the moment. You're reacting to everything unresolved inside you. They just triggered it. This is where the illusion of love starts breaking down, because eventually the person you're projecting onto stops matching the fantasy. They become human. They disappoint you. They don't respond the way your shadow wants them to. And suddenly, all the intensity turns into resentment. You feel betrayed, abandoned, let down. But they didn't change. Your illusion collapsed. The part of you that thought they would save you realizes they can't. And because the relationship was never rooted in truth, it starts to fall apart. This isn't just common. It's everywhere. People aren't building real relationships. They're building emotional contracts based on mutual projections. One person agrees to play the savior. The other agrees to play the wounded child. One becomes the caretaker. The other becomes the helpless one, or the addict and the fixer, or the silent and the overcommunicator. These dynamics feel normal because they're familiar, but they're not love. They're trauma reenactments. They're the shadow in action. The reason most people never escape this cycle is because they keep calling it love. They think it's supposed to hurt. They think it's supposed to feel like chaos. They think emotional pain means it's deep. So they stay. They try harder. They give more. And all they're doing is feeding the same unconscious pattern that's been running their relationship since the beginning. To break it, you have to stop lying. You have to admit that what you're calling love might be something else entirely. It might be fear. It might be dependency. It might be ego. It might be the shadow trying to get what it didn't get from your parents. And when you admit that, everything changes. You stop chasing intensity. You stop needing to be chosen. You stop building your worth around how someone else treats you. You step back and start seeing clearly. Clarity feels cold at first because you've been living in heat. But clarity is the beginning of real love. Not the emotional high, not the fantasy, not the rescue story. Real love doesn't need projection. It doesn't need to be earned or proved. It doesn't make you disappear. It lets you be seen, without scripts, without roles, without unconscious expectations. But you can't get there if your shadow is still driving. You can't love from wholeness if you don't know what parts of yourself you've rejected. You can't connect honestly if you're still looking for someone to fix you. You'll just keep finding partners who mirror your wounds, and you'll keep calling it fate. Jung's work wasn't about fixing other people. It was about facing yourself. The shadow is yours. The story is yours. The pattern is yours. And once you take responsibility for it, you stop handing it to other people to carry. You stop expecting them to heal what you refuse to look at. And you stop mistaking suffering for connection. The most dangerous love is the one you don't question. The one that feels familiar, urgent, inevitable. That's the one built from shadow. And until you bring it into the light, it will own you. This is the real work. Not finding the right person, but becoming someone who no longer uses love to escape themselves. That's when everything changes. That's when love becomes real. That's when the shadow loses control. You think it was different this time. New face, new story, new beginning. But it ends the same way. Again, the same arguments, the same silences, the same disappointment. You thought you learned. You thought you were ready. But you're right back in it. And if you're honest, you know why. You didn't choose this person. Your shadow did. The most painful part of romantic relationships isn't betrayal or loss. It's realizing you repeated yourself. You saw the red flags and ignored them. You felt the tension and pretended it was chemistry. You chased a feeling that felt familiar, not safe. That wasn't love. That was recognition. Recognition of a wound you haven't healed. And it showed up again, dressed as love. Carl Jung explained this clearly. When something in your psyche is unconscious, it won't stay quiet. It will express itself through your life. Your choice of partner is not as rational as you think. You're drawn to what reflects your inner state. And if that inner state is fragmented, unprocessed, afraid, you'll be attracted to people who match that. Not because it's good for you, but because it fits. You feel alive around them because they activate your nervous system. You feel obsessed because they confirm your deepest fear. That love must be earned, that you're not enough, that something about you always pushes people away. And you stay, hoping this time the ending will be different. It won't. Not until the shadow is exposed. When you're unconscious of the role your shadow plays, love becomes an emotional survival game. You try to manage the other person's moods so you don't feel abandoned. You censor your truth to avoid conflict. You create fake peace to avoid your own emotional chaos. And worst of all, you believe that if you just love harder, give more, sacrifice yourself, you'll finally feel secure. This is how the shadow keeps you trapped. It convinces you that your suffering is noble. That endurance equals loyalty. That your emotional instability is proof of passion. It tells you that the pain means it's real. But real love isn't chaotic. It doesn't push you into desperation. It doesn't force you to perform for affection. That's not love. That's dysfunction with a romantic soundtrack. Most people don't want to hear this because it destroys the fantasy. It means facing the possibility that every time you said, "I love you," you were really saying, "Don't leave me." That every time you chase someone, you were really chasing approval. That every time you felt addicted to someone, you were really trying to avoid being alone with yourself. That's not a love story. That's a trauma loop. The repetition isn't accidental. It's structural. Your psyche is trying to resolve something, and it will keep setting the stage until you finally see it. That's why you meet the same kind of person again and again. Emotionally unavailable, controlling, unstable, overbearing. It doesn't matter what mask they wear, underneath they're the same, and so are you. Still try to fix the past through someone in the present. You have to break the loop, but not by changing partners, by changing awareness. You need to stop asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and start asking, "What part of me keeps choosing this?" You need to look at your pain and admit that you've been using people to escape it, that you've been calling dysfunction love because it gave you something to obsess over instead of confronting yourself. And here's the truth no one wants to say. Sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who fit your wounds, not your growth. That's why it hurts so much to let go, because you're not just losing them, you're losing the fantasy that they were going to save you. And once that fantasy dies, you're left with what you've been avoiding, your own reflection. This is where real inner work begins. You stop blaming them. You stop needing closure. You stop waiting for them to explain. You realize that they were never the point. They were the trigger. They were the mirror. They were the messenger. And now, the message is clear. Your shadow has been choosing your relationships, not your truth. Once you see this, you start remembering the small moments you used to ignore. The tight feeling in your chest when they spoke. The way you lost your voice around them. The anxiety that you called excitement. The apology you made after being disrespected. The way you were more afraid of being alone than being unhappy. These weren't random. These were warnings. You just didn't want to hear them because listening would have meant leaving. But now you listen. You pay attention. You stop calling disrespect a misunderstanding. You stop calling confusion complexity. You stop calling chaos intensity. You name things for what they are. And in that naming, you take back control. You begin to choose differently. Not because you're trying to be smarter, but because your nervous system no longer craves what used to feel like home. You're not chasing what's familiar. You're noticing what's healthy. And it feels boring at first. But that boredom is actually stability. It's the absence of trauma. It's the absence of fear disguised as passion. You start showing up differently too. You stop performing. You stop adjusting. You say what you think. You ask for what you need. You walk away when something feels off. Not with anger, but with clarity. Not as a reaction, but as a choice. That's how you know the shadow is losing its grip. And here's the most powerful part. When someone no longer controls your peace, they no longer control your worth. You're not looking for a savior. You're not waiting to be chosen. You've stopped outsourcing your emotional life to other people. Because now, you've met the part of you that was making all the decisions from fear. And once you meet that part, once you face it fully, you no longer need someone else to complete the sentence for you. You become the person your shadow kept looking for. And when that happens, you don't fall in love to be saved. You love because you're already free. Emotional dependency is the most common lie people tell themselves in relationships. They say it's love, but it's not. It's fear, masked as loyalty. It's anxiety, mistaken for passion. It's control, disguised as care. And it always begins with one idea, that the other person holds something you don't have. That without them, you're incomplete. That's not love. That's the shadow, demanding someone else carry what you still refuse to hold. People don't become addicted to people. They become addicted to how those people help them escape themselves. When someone distracts you from your pain, they feel necessary. When they give you attention, they feel like oxygen. When they disappear, you collapse, not because they're gone, but because the part of you that depended on them to survive has been exposed. This is not about connection. It's about survival. It's the nervous system reacting to loss of control, not loss of love. This happens when your identity is not solid, when you don't know who you are outside of being wanted, when your sense of self is shaped by how someone else sees you. You say you miss them, but what you miss is who you were allowed to be around them. You miss the illusion. You miss the story. You miss the distraction from your own inner void. And when it ends, you mistake withdrawal for heartbreak. But you're not broken, you're unmasked. Carl Jung taught that the shadow seeks completion through the other, but it doesn't lead to wholeness. It leads to collapse. Because what you're trying to merge with isn't a person. It's an internal absence, and no one can fill that. That's why you give too much, lose yourself, override your needs, stay when it's toxic, beg for scraps, and call it love. That's why you panic when they pull away, not because something is being lost, but because something unfinished inside you is being triggered. Real love doesn't feel like dependency. It doesn't activate your trauma. It doesn't make you feel unsafe without it. When the shadow is in charge, your partner becomes your regulator. They decide if today you're lovable, if you're enough, if you're safe. Your emotions rise and fall based on what they do. One message changes your whole day. One silence sends you into spirals. You're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological power loop. People who live this way don't know how to hold boundaries. They think closeness means merging. They think love means sacrificing. They think connection means constant reassurance. They apologize for needing space. They feel guilty for saying no. They think their job is to fix or be fixed. But all of that is the shadow maintaining a dynamic where no one has to face themselves. You distract each other from the truth and call it intimacy. You can't build a healthy relationship if the foundation is fear of abandonment, because everything you do will be filtered through protection. You won't speak honestly. You won't show your full self. You won't risk disconnection, and that means you will never experience real connection. You're performing safety, not building it. And the moment something threatens that illusion, the shadow takes over. Rage, collapse, manipulation, withdrawal. Not because you're evil, because you're afraid. Afraid that if you lose them, you'll lose yourself. That's what dependency really is. The inability to exist in emotional separation without feeling like you're dying. And it doesn't always look desperate. Sometimes it looks romantic. You say, "I can't live without you," and call it devotion. You say, "You're my everything," and call it commitment. But you've made them your identity. And when they leave, you don't just grieve, you disintegrate. Because you never built yourself outside of them. The shadow wants fusion. Not connection, fusion. No boundaries, no difference, no distance. That way, you don't have to feel separate. You don't have to sit in your own pain. But true love only exists between two whole people. And wholeness requires distance. It requires sovereignty. It requires that you face your own shadow, not use someone else to contain it. Most relationships break not because of lack of love, but because of unconscious expectations. You expect them to be your healer, your parent, your therapist, your emotional mirror. You expect them to say the right thing at the right time, to rescue you from discomfort, to validate every insecurity. And when they don't, you punish them. Or you punish yourself. Either way, it's not love, it's unconscious contract. They didn't agree to be everything. You just assumed they would be. Because that's what your shadow wanted. It wanted someone to meet your every unmet need. But they can't. No one can. And once you realize that, you stop trying to make them. You start taking your needs back. You start taking your energy back. You stop bleeding for love that was never about you. It was about your survival system running the show. This is the moment the dynamic starts to shift. Not when they change. When you do. When you stop using love to regulate yourself. when you stop outsourcing your emotional stability, when you stop blaming them for your inner emptiness, when you stop needing them to fix what you've been avoiding. That's when the shadow begins to dissolve. You start to feel the difference between attachment and love, between emotional intensity and actual intimacy. You start setting boundaries not as punishment, but as self-respect. You stop chasing. You stop proving. You stop rescuing. You become still. You become clear. And the relationships that can't survive that clarity fall away. That's not a loss. That's alignment. You were never meant to save anyone, and no one was meant to save you. You were meant to meet yourself fully and then love from that place. Not to escape yourself, but to share yourself. That's the difference between shadow-driven romance and conscious connection. One requires performance. The other requires presence. One is built on fear. The other is built on truth. When the shadow drives, love becomes need. When you integrate the shadow, love becomes choice. You're no longer looking for someone to make you feel whole. You already are. And now you want to build, not fix. To give, not grasp. To stay, not attach. That's when love stops being dangerous. That's when it becomes real. When love is shadow-driven, you don't build connection, you dissolve into it. You lose your boundaries, your sense of self, your clarity. And the worst part is, you don't even notice. You think that's what love is supposed to feel like. Selflessness, devotion, merging. You think the more you give up, the stronger the relationship becomes. That's the illusion. Because the moment you stop existing as an individual, the relationship stops being real. It turns into dependency, projection, control. Anything but love. People think closeness means sameness. That if someone really loves you, they'll think like you, want the same things, feel what you feel, agree with you all the time. They expect full emotional fusion, no tension, no contradiction. But that's not love. That's possession. And when that illusion breaks, when the other person shows a separate mind, a separate will, a separate truth, the shadow panics. You feel rejected, betrayed, abandoned, but nothing is wrong. You just never learned how to stay yourself in love. Carl Jung's concept of individuation, becoming a whole, integrated self, is impossible when your identity collapses inside a relationship. And that's what happens to most people. They adapt. They shrink. They become who they think their partner wants them to be. They filter themselves. They keep the peace. They avoid conflict. And then they wake up one day and don't know who they are anymore. The shadow doesn't want individuality. It wants safety. It wants to be chosen at any cost, even if it means losing yourself completely. That's why you stop saying what you really think. Why you accept things you wouldn't tolerate from anyone else. Why you start performing instead of living. And why you can't let go. Not because you're in love, but because you're afraid of what's left when the mirror is gone. This is where so many relationships break people. Not because of the other person, but because of how much of themselves they give up to keep it. You compromised once, then again. You sacrifice boundaries, then standards, then voice. Eventually, all that's left is emotional residue. You're still there, technically, but not really. You become a reflection of their needs, their moods, their expectations. And you call that love? It's not. It's self-erasure. It's shadow compliance. And it always ends the same way. Burnout, resentment, or breakdown. You can't love someone and betray yourself at the same time. That's not noble. It's self-abandonment. And if you do it long enough, it turns you into a ghost. You stop trusting your own emotions. You start second-guessing your needs. You question your memory. You wonder if you're asking for too much. You make excuses for disrespect. You become dependent on approval to feel like you matter. And worst of all, you start believing this is just how love works. But love without individuality isn't love. It's codependence. It's emotional merging that feels like connection, but is actually avoidance. You're avoiding yourself, your fear, your loneliness, your unmet needs, your history. You find someone to drown in so you don't have to face any of it. And as long as they play their part, you feel whole. But the second they stop performing, the illusion shatters. That's not love falling apart. That's fantasy breaking down. Real love requires two whole people, not halves looking to complete each other, not broken pieces trying to fuse into one, not trauma bonding in the name of soulmates, but individuals who can stand in their own truth and choose each other without collapsing into each other. That's hard, because it means you have to be emotionally self-sufficient. You have to know who you are. You have to hold tension, disagreement, autonomy, without seeing it as rejection. The shadow can't do that. It interprets difference as danger. It wants reassurance, not reality. It wants agreement, not authenticity. That's why shadow-based love is full of emotional blackmail, guilt, silence, punishment, power games. Not because people are bad, but because they're unconscious. They're afraid of real intimacy. They want closeness without vulnerability. They want connection without responsibility. They want to be chosen, even if it means disappearing. But once you see it, you can't go back. You can't pretend this dynamic is romantic. You can't keep acting like sacrifice equals love. You can't stay in something that requires you to be less than yourself. You stop pretending. You start telling the truth. And that truth isn't always nice. Sometimes it means walking away from someone you care about. Not because you don't love them, but because you love yourself enough to stop disappearing. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's exactly what the shadow doesn't want. It wants safety through sameness, love through fusion. But that's not who you really are. That's who you became to survive. And love shouldn't require survival mode. Love should allow you to exhale, to be seen, to grow, to be challenged, not erased. If your love requires you to abandon yourself, it's not love. If you can't say no, it's not love. If you have to become someone else to keep it, it's not love. That's the shadow using connection to avoid individuality. And you can't heal inside that. When you begin to reclaim yourself, the dynamic changes. You stop agreeing to what doesn't feel right. You stop managing their emotions at the expense of your own. You stop apologizing for existing. You become visible. And that visibility tests the relationship. If it falls apart because you finally showed up as yourself, it wasn't real to begin with. Love without individuality is addiction. Love with individuality is liberation. That's what makes it rare. Because most people don't want to meet you. They want to meet the version of you that keeps them comfortable. But you're done performing. And when you stop, the shadow can no longer run the show. The most dangerous illusion in love is the idea that you can save someone. That if you love them hard enough, wait long enough, give more than anyone else ever has, they'll finally change. You don't say it out loud, but deep down, that's the fantasy. That your love is the missing piece. That your presence is the solution. That their chaos is temporary and your loyalty will fix it. But the truth is simple. If you're trying to save them, you're not in love with them, you're in love with your role. The shadow doesn't want love. It wants control disguised as rescue. When you focus on fixing someone, you don't have to face yourself. You don't have to admit that you're avoiding your own pain by investing in someone else's dysfunction. You turn their mess into your mission. You stay longer than you should. You absorb pain that isn't yours. You tell yourself you're being strong, but you're just avoiding the truth. You're afraid to stop being needed. This is one of the most common forms of unconscious shadow play in relationships. One person becomes the wounded, the broken, the unstable. The other becomes the guide, the therapist, the emotional backbone. It feels meaningful, purposeful, even heroic, but it's not a relationship. It's a transaction built on trauma, and it never ends well. You end up resenting them for not becoming what you imagined. You carry the emotional weight of two people and start to collapse. You silence your own needs to protect their fragility. You confuse their dependency with connection. You call their inconsistency a cry for help. You tell yourself, they just need time, and you waste years on a fantasy that was never your job to fulfill. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious seeks projection, and projection always distorts reality. When you assign meaning to someone that they didn't earn, you're not loving them, you're using them. You're using their brokenness to feel useful. You're using their instability to stay busy. You're using their trauma to justify your own avoidance of self-work. And the moment they don't change, or worse, the moment they do and no longer need you, you fall apart. Because being needed gave you identity. That's the trap. Your shadow made love a role instead of a relationship. And that role is hard to give up, especially when it made you feel important. Especially when your own self-worth was tied to being the one who never gave up. But at some point, you realize this isn't strength. This is self-destruction. This isn't loyalty. This is fear of letting go. You don't have to hate someone to leave them. You don't have to reach your limit in order to walk away. You can simply decide, I no longer want to be in a dynamic where I have to disappear to keep things together. That's not abandonment. That's honesty. The shadow hates honesty because honesty breaks the story. It exposes the real reason you stayed. Not because they were your soulmate, but because they reflected your wound. They gave you a chance to play out a role that made your pain feel productive. But now you see it. And once you see it, everything shifts. You start asking better questions. Not why can't I help them, but why do I need to? Not why are they so emotionally unavailable, but why do I accept it? Not why don't they value me, but why do I keep proving my value instead of protecting it? These are the questions that end the story, because they bring the focus back to you, not as blame, but as responsibility. The moment you stop making the relationship about them, you start healing. Most people never get here. They stay in the loop. They trade one project for another, one fixer role for another. They keep picking partners who need saving and call it love. But it's not love if it drains you. It's not love if it requires you to become smaller. It's not love if it never leaves room for your needs. You weren't put here to rescue broken people. You were put here to become whole yourself. And real love only happens when two whole people meet, not when one tries to carry the other. That's the shift. When a shadow loses power, you stop being drawn to what needs you. You start being drawn to what meets you. You no longer look for weakness to repair. You look for strength to grow with. You're not addicted to chaos. You crave calm, not because you're boring, because you're stable. You've done the work. You faced the part of you that confused pain with purpose. And now you want something real. You don't romanticize suffering. You don't need the drama. You don't feel lost without the highs and lows. You recognize peace and you trust it. That's what happens when a shadow steps back. You become available for a different kind of love. One that doesn't demand a role. One that doesn't trigger your survival system. One that doesn't require endless repair. You're not looking for someone to save or be saved by. You're looking for someone to build with, to evolve with, to meet without needing to manage. That kind of love is rare, not because it's hard to find, but because most people never clear the space for it. They're too full of unresolved patterns, outdated roles, unconscious fear. But you're done with that. You've seen what it costs to stay in the story. You paid the price, and now you're ready to step out of it. Love without the shadow isn't perfect, but it's real. It allows difference. It allows space. It allows honesty. And it allows you to be fully yourself without being consumed by someone else. That's not a fantasy. That's what happens when you stop letting your shadow choose for you. There's a moment in every person's life where they look back at all the people they loved and realize they never actually saw them. What they saw was projection, fantasy, memory, need. They were chasing ghosts, not the person, the feeling, the illusion of being saved, of being chosen, of being completed. And it always ended the same way: exhaustion, disappointment, confusion. Because what they were calling love was actually the shadow, doing everything it could to fill what still felt empty inside. Carl Jung warned us, the unconscious doesn't want you to be happy. It wants you to be whole. And until you understand that, you will keep suffering in relationships that feel destined, but are actually just patterns. You'll keep calling emotional instability depth. You'll keep confusing survival with loyalty. You'll keep fighting to hold on to people that your healed self wouldn't even look twice at. Because when the shadow is in control, your nervous system makes your decisions for you. But there comes a point when something changes. You stop reaching for them. You stop checking your phone. You stop waiting for the apology, the message, the redemption arc. You stop fantasizing that they'll become who you hoped they were. And you finally say what most people never do. That wasn't love. It was emotional projection wrapped in intensity. It was fear wrapped in affection. It was dependency wrapped in devotion. And now it's over. That's the beginning of real healing. When you stop rewriting the past, when you stop excusing behavior that broke you, when you stop explaining away the pain just to protect the image of what you thought it was, you let die. You let the version of you that begged, performed, chased, and overextended finally rest. You stop being the one who proves, persuades, pleads. You start being the one who sees clearly. And the clarity is brutal. You see how many times you said, "I'm fine," when you were breaking. You see how many times you stayed when everything in you said leave. You see how many times you called it love when it was self-abandonment. You see it all, and it hurts. But that pain is clean. That pain is real. That pain is yours. And it finally has a place. You stop asking why they didn't love you. You stop making it about them. You stop measuring your worth against their inability to care. You realize that some people don't love, not because you're unlovable, but because they're not available. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And maybe they never were. But your shadow didn't care. It saw the potential. It saw the symbol. It saw someone who matched your old blueprint. And you followed that feeling into chaos. Now you don't. Now you hesitate. Now you ask real questions. Why do I want this? What am I feeling? And where is it coming from? Is this love, or is this longing? Is this attraction, or is this familiarity? And you don't lie to yourself. Not anymore. You've already seen what happens when you do. You also stop playing the rescuer. You don't take on projects. You don't try to fix anyone. You don't invest in potential. You stop thinking your love can transform people who haven't chosen their own healing. You let people be where they are, and you choose where you want to be. Without guilt, without savior complexes, without the idea that your value is based on how much you can tolerate. You recognize peace now. You protect it. You no longer feel bored in stability. You no longer chase emotional spikes just to feel alive. You stop mistaking anxiety for connection. You stop looking for highs and calling it chemistry. You feel the difference and you honor it. You become someone you trust. You know what you want. Not the checklist, the feeling, the energy, the dynamic, the mutuality. The safety that doesn't cost your truth. You're no longer in a hurry. You're not trying to make it work. You're not searching for someone to unlock your value. You already hold the key. That's the final stage. You no longer use love to escape yourself. You use it to express yourself. You no longer disappear to be accepted. You show up fully. You no longer ask to be chosen. You choose. You no longer build connection through pain. You build it through presence. Love without the shadow is not loud. It's not obsessive. It doesn't consume. It expands. It makes room. It calms the nervous system instead of activating it. It invites you deeper into yourself, not away from yourself. That kind of love doesn't demand explanation. It just is. And you're no longer confused by what it isn't. You can hear someone's silence and not internalize it. You can watch someone pull away and not chase them. You can love someone and still walk away. You can be alone and not feel like something's missing. You can feel desire without needing possession. You can feel fear and still act from clarity. Because the shadow is no longer making decisions. This is what real wholeness looks like. Not perfection, not constant happiness, but full presence, even when it's hard. Full awareness, even when it hurts. Full responsibility, even when no one else gives it to you. You stop blaming. You stop performing. You stop negotiating with your own worth. You live as you are. You love from that place. That's what happens when the shadow loses its grip. You don't fall in love with fantasies anymore. You don't fall in love with roles. You don't fall in love with what they represent. You love people or you don't. You choose based on truth, not trauma. And when it's real, you feel it, because it doesn't pull you away from yourself. It brings you home. That's Carl Jung's darkest truth about love, and your most liberating one.